And we could really see that. I thought everyone was going to give the talk with me, and I was pretty excited about that. But now I guess I have to go through all these slides on my own. Okay, so this is usually where we end a talk. What questions do you have? Or where we end a meeting, and there's a few minutes left, and often the questions are actually the most important part of the meeting. So for my keynote today, I wanted to talk about the questions. So shared a little bit of my background, kind of my journey here. Threw on some things like I was a ski patrol and lifeguard back in the day. And through this journey, I have had probably more questions than answers most of the time. And I was always looking for places to have answers or even just have conversations to solve kind of some of these new things that were put in front of me all the time. So I have these kind of like random lines, and these are kind of random punctuations, but like where there were really moments of transition for me where my next job, I didn't really know so much what I should be doing. And fortunately, I had people on my teams with grace that let me learn. But those were moments where the questions to me were so important. So I wanted to talk today about 10 questions that you always wanted to ask about data science leadership. So these are my 10 questions, and you'll see that 2 of them are your questions. So I'll show you how to ask those questions in just a few minutes. So I want to kind of start with like this leadership journey. Am I a leader? What if I don't look, act, or feel like a leader? Are there game-changing leadership tools? Should I have meetings? How do I explain that data science is important? Now, in the age of AI, what new skills are needed with AI? When should we use AI? A couple of your questions. And finally, how do I motivate people? So let's start with the very first question. Am I a leader? And the answer to this question is yes. There is a leader in every chair. And there's lots of different ways to think about leadership. So we think about people with certain titles or professors or things like that that kind of have been given this sort of leadership title. But leadership shows up in a lot of different ways. So this is just a very sort of short list, but are there things up here that you identify with? Do we have teachers? If lone data scientists, you're a leader because you're leading your entire data science department. Even if you're just leading yourself. Friends, mentors, parents, coaches, these are all places where there's opportunities for leadership. And being a leader isn't just about a title, it's a mindset. So there's this concept of little L leadership. So it's how do you show up in ways that are, where you have leadership, where you show leadership. And this is really important as a topic to me personally, because I really deeply believe in this, a leader in every chair, because I think it's so important to have the perspectives of different people in leadership and the ability to guide the places that we're going more collectively. So let's just start and kind of pause for a moment. So where do you see that you're a leader in your life? And so this begins the journey of answering Slido questions. There's actually only 2. So you can see up here there's a barcode. If you scan that barcode with your phone, it will take you to a place where you can answer something. You can put this number in at slido.com, and Cher is going to put in the link in Slack. So this will show up as a word cloud. So what you type will end up on the screen. I love this list. Chills. All the different places that we show up for ourselves and others as leaders. And you can see it's not just, today I'm putting this in the context of data science, but these aren't things that just show up for us in our lives at work. They show up in a lot of other places in our lives as well. So you can keep filling this in, and I'll share this word cloud out through Slack as well. So the really cool thing about leadership is that it is something that we can learn. So sometimes there's this idea, oh, leaders are born. This is a born leader, we hear, right? And that is just not true. Leadership is a skill like everything else that we can learn. The challenge is that we don't often get opportunities to learn it. So some schools, maybe they have like a leadership program, like a leadership class. But most of the time, we're just sort of figuring this out on our own. And a lot of times, we're looking for examples. And we see a style of leadership and we say, well, I'm not like that person, so I'm not a leader. Or I don't like how that person shows up. I don't want to become a leader because I don't want to do that. But that is a societal issue and not an us issue, although it is an us issue because societal issues are ours. But it is a thing that we can have more opportunities to learn. So that's why I love those questions. Okay, so here's my list. So here's where you're gonna add and ask the ones that you wanna ask. Okay, so we're gonna go to Slido again. I think it's that same number. If you're on your phone, there's a Q&A. You just did the poll. If you click on the Q&A tab, it's gonna take you to something else, and then you can type in your questions there. Okay, so go ahead and put in your questions, and then, oh, perfect. So you've already, so you can upvote them. So the two most upvoted questions I'm gonna answer as 8 and 9, and actually discuss versus answer. So those will be come up, so I'll come back to this list. Loving this question, ready? Okay, so I already started on this journey. What if I don't look, act, or feel like the leaders that I've seen? So the real power of you being a leader, anyone being a leader, is that you bring all of who you are and what you do to be the type of leader that you want to be. That's why I kind of put up on that slide, oh, you know, I worked as a lifeguard, or I did ski patrol, and I was talking with Amanda here, who had, you know, kind of other formative experiences that have influenced her leadership style. And that's true for me too. It hasn't just been at work. It's been things that I did when I was 16 years old that have helped shape sort of how I see working with people and the things that I've learned. And so what we see as like, oh, this is what a leadership, like the charismatic person on the stage or the mean person that like forges through with their ideas, to heck with the consequences, like those people like that we say are leaders are actually, like studies show, not the most effective leaders. So this book is one of my favorites, Good to Great, and it's about creating like sustainable organizations. And every single study that they did in this, where there was like the charismatic leader, after that person left, the company fell apart. So they didn't build like an effective, sustainable organization. There are these other, he has like level 5 leader is kind of the most effective leadership style. These are the traits that they found were most important in effective leadership. So humility, understanding of strengths and weaknesses, focus on organization's purpose, passionate commitment to continuous learning, right? And a relentless determination to do what is right and not what is easy. So this is kind of my personal mantra, and it's actually like the first time I've kind of said it. This idea of lead with kindness. Because for me, this embodies both being kind as a leader, which is not necessarily the same as being nice, and starting new interactions from a place of kindness. And this is also the place where I've messed up the most. And this is the place where I've hurt people. And that's hard to learn from too. But this has kind of now become more my North Star in terms of thinking about how to approach conversations, how to work with people, and this kind of concept of, we have human-centered design, designing for how humans use things, human-centered leadership, lead for the humans that we work with. So I'm like, cool, these are the effective leaders, but we do have still this really large bias, so I don't want to gloss over that, and who gets to be the big L leaders, right, the people with the titles. So who we elect and promote aligns with our cultural ideas of who we've taught to be leaders. So like in the United States, a lot of that is loud and tall and has big ideas. In other cultures, that might be different. But that idea of who we're taught is really overwhelming in terms of how we think about that. So we will encounter that in our own journey if we're looking to grow into like big L leaders. So we can address that when we select our own leaders, if that's like your team lead or an election, and something that collectively we can keep working on together. But I don't want to gloss over that this is a real challenge for both the people who are like growing as leaders and society as a whole. All right, so for each of these questions, I'm going to have hopefully a continued learning one, and I'll put links to these resources in Slack afterwards. So This Good to Great is one of my favorite books. The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership is really great. And then this book, Quiet, is The Power of Introverts in a World for Extroverts, which is amazing. I love that book. So I really recommend all these as kind of different ways to look at how you might want to show up as a leader in your community. Okay, so enough of waxing poetic. Are there game-changing leadership tools? What if I told you that one tool could save lives, improve an organization, change how you feel about your work, and fits on one piece of paper? The answer is checklists. So why is that a leadership tool, you might ask? We'll get to that. So why do I love leadership checklists? What can they do, and how do you get started? I have always loved checklists. I was like the kid that was like going to the beach, and I'm like, let's make sure we have everything, and I write it down. I was like a really fun kid. So like for me, I don't know, it's just always been a way to organize information. When I read this book, The Checklist Manifesto, it spoke to my heart. And this book is amazing. So this is by Atul Gawande, who's a surgeon. And what he shows in this book is that the power of checklists in things like the air flight checklist and in surgery. And he demonstrated that using checklists in surgeries literally saved lives. It also does for airplanes. The issue is that airplanes, they use them, surgeons do not. And so checklists, they have a few characteristics that help them be effective. So the first is that it's work that's repeated often. It's related to your role. Don't try to write someone else's checklist. It's precise enough that you can check it off. It's easy to use, even in difficult situations, and provides reminders of only the important steps. So if there's too much, it doesn't work. It's not a great plan for a one-time task, someone else's job, vague or general, complicated to follow, or lists every small detail. And here are some examples of checklists. I worked with the Teddyverse team, so we were pretty good with checklists, like release checklists, but there's onboarding checklists. There's lots of different types of checklists that you'll see in your life. But what makes why don't surgeons use them? The challenge of checklists is that they're really about people. And this is why they're an important leadership tool, is because you have to get in a room and talk with people, which can be awkward at times, especially when we're used to sitting on Zoom meetings and our computers. Say, if I ask you about apples, you'll know what playbook I'm following. And we had apples at lunch. Wow, that worked great for me. Okay, so there's just two hard things about checklists then. One is creating them, and the other is using them. So for creating checklists, we have to get the right people together, We have to identify complex things that we do frequently. So first we have to decide, like, is this a thing that, like, we do a lot? You have to agree on what's important. That one right there is one of the biggest challenges. Define what done means. What does success look like? And then you have to write it all down. So each one of these steps is actually a conversation, coming to agreement around an inherently complex task. And then to use the checklist, you have to have a buy-in to using it. So it doesn't do any good if it's sitting on the piece of paper and nobody's going to use it. So, and you have to use it every time, especially when you're in a rush. And you have to notice what works and doesn't work, so you're never done with it. So the challenge of both creating and using them is, if we go back to those 5 effective leaderships, right? Humility, continued learning, all of those things that can make an effective checklist are about bringing people together and making decisions together and showing leadership and creating and using these checklists. So surgeons don't use them because they don't think that they need them. And so we actually literally lose lives every year because some people don't think that, like, they know everything already. And so that's really disappointing. So this is a great opportunity with your team to create checklists. Okay, so what's some continued learning? Checklist Manifesto, amazing book. If you're thinking about, like, code, the use this function in the Tidyverse has a release GitHub issue checklist. I'm just using it on a Python project. Some modifications there, but those are just a few examples of good resources. And then, you know, your paper and pencil is, I always like to kind of start on paper because to get to that final version is a little bit. So checklists are your leadership power tool. All right, I love all these. I asked them myself. I'm like, great question. So should I have meetings? So we hear a lot, this meeting should have been an email, right? And I'm going to make the alternative pitch and say this email should have been a meeting. And that's because meetings are not good all the time, but there are important moments for meetings, and when there are ways to do them that make them effective. So meetings are good when it's a topic that people will be worried about. How many people have gotten an email in their inbox that they read and then, like, wanted to go throw up? Yeah, that probably should have been a meeting. Because you have a lot of concerns that you're holding on to with no opportunity to get more nuance or talk about that conversation. You need to be able to exchange ideas with others to make a decision. That week-long 85 email thread where you could have been on a call for 15 minutes and made a decision. And then when you don't yet have a clear question, right, when you need to get together, and you can't just answer a question in an email, it's actually a discussion. There's a lot of other reasons, but there are moments where bringing people together to have conversation about something is going to produce better outcomes and also be more beneficial to the people involved in the project, like as people. So meetings, though, are not, like, across the board a great idea. Most meetings are not necessarily run very well, and I'm not, like, being mad at anyone about that. Again, people don't teach us how to run meetings. But a lot of them are used as, like, information sharing. So here's some information, and then, yes, that could have been an email. So meetings are effective when they have goals. The format and the people in the meeting are matched to the goals. Sometimes it's hard to not invite everybody to the meeting, but that's important that you have the people that are needed for that conversation. There's an agenda. You know what you're going to talk about. Doesn't need to be detailed, but have some idea. There's a meeting facilitation that creates psychological safety. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that one. Both of these are, like, my favorites. The meeting facilitation practices are really important, so how that meeting is held. And then actions are identified and followed up on. If you don't do that, you're, like, breaking the trust of the people that came to that meeting. They're not going to go to other meetings. So it's important for accountability and trust to have that as a part of a meeting as well. So I'm going to take a little side road into psychological safety. So there was a study at Google around what makes the most effective teams. And they're thinking, oh, it's a skill or a certain person or things like that. And what they actually found is what made the most effective teams was when the group had psychological safety with each other. So that means that they feel like they can share with each other and not be seen as ignorant, incompetent, negative, disruptive. So confident about admitting mistakes, asking questions, and offering new ideas. So if you're going to bring a bunch of people together and not create a space where the people can actually contribute to that meeting, again, why hold a meeting? This is not easy to do. This is why I reference facilitation practices, because creating and holding that space is a real challenge. But I would say one of the most important things a leader can do is not you talking in that meeting, but creating that space and holding it so that other people can speak. So effective facilitation, there are meeting roles. There's a facilitator. What does a facilitator do? There's someone who's taking notes. Sometimes you'll have a timekeeper if you only have certain times for things. And these roles should rotate. You should not always have the same junior woman taking notes. So having these roles and like outlining what they are and then assigning them to people, there's no like, well, I don't know how to take notes, right? We've outlined it. So that's important. There's some sort of introduction. So that's actually another super cool thing in the Atul Gawande's book, is one of the things that really improved outcomes for surgeries is when all the people who were coming together for the surgery introduced themselves to each other, because then they saw each other as people and could work together. It's clear how people participate. Do you raise your hand? Do you put a sticky note on your computer? How is it that people participate? There are multiple ways to participate. So not everybody works really well in a meeting room, like talking in the moment. So one of the things that we've done is like you have a Google Doc, maybe you share it in advance, or you have ways for people to fill out a survey or write in a Google Doc. So you might have moments of silence in your meeting where everybody is going and reading a document and contributing something or filling in a form, so that there's ways for people who engage most effectively in different ways to engage in the topic. And then, I add the actions. I guess I'm trying to follow up on my action of following up on actions. So this is, I guess it's kind of another superpower, meeting facilitation. And I'll say like, the bar is so low on this that like, if you do like a little bit, people will be like, this was the best meeting ever. I'm not kidding, like seriously, go try. You'll be like, you'll be a rock star, a meeting rock star, which I think, again, is everyone's goal. So continue learning on these ones. Great resources. The Center for Scientific Collaboration and Community Engagement, CSCCE, they have a lot of great resources around community engagement. This is one. They have one on meeting facilitation. This is if you want to see it in action. The Carpentries really uses all these practices. If you go to any of their community meetings, you will see it in action, and it works. It's a global community of thousands of instructors. So go hang out in one of their meetings. All right. Half an hour left, right? Oh no, 10, 20. Okay. All right, how do I explain that data science is important? So I asked on LinkedIn, what questions do people have? And Amanda gets all the call outs, I guess. This was one of the questions that she posed, and I was like, I need your help to answer this question. So this is one that I struggle with for sure. But the important thing is sometimes we have to do the work on the why to be able to work on the how. And this makes me very sad, but it is true. I, for much of my career, still even in moments earlier today, am like, why do I have to advocate to be able to do my job? Like, you hired me to do this thing. Like, can I just do it? And the answer to that is that's not really how things work. And that's just because people have a lot of different priorities. And so learning how to communicate why your work is important, to sort of be given the space to do it, is a whole other skill. And so that makes it kind of frustrating. And it takes time and energy away from, like, I could have been writing code, I could have been producing plots. And so what I'm suggesting in this is to become a boundary spanner. So that is taking the time to learn about the motivations of the other people that you're working with. Often this is people kind of above, like up in the hierarchy, but they have different incentives and different motivations than you do probably. So taking some time to understand what those are lets you speak to them in a way about why your work is important, in a way that it's not even that like you're convincing them, it's the way that they can hear, right? Because it already fits into the framework within which they're working. A really important part is listening with curiosity or to understand. Again, meetings are great for this, well-facilitated meetings. Because lots of times we go in and we want to convince, right? Or we have a short period of time. But if we can listen with curiosity and to understand, then that again helps us develop like the shared goals, the shared language, and helps us build that bridge between what we want to do, what we think is important, and the other people and their set of priorities. And then another important part of this is just developing relationships with people so that you see each other as humans, and so that you're able to work through some harder conversations. I should say, like, also just like some of these practices like meeting facilitation or trying to understand where people are coming from, all of these things, they won't necessarily overcome someone who is like overtly hostile or things like that. Some of these things are sort of beyond meeting practices, and so there's other strategies there, but we're not talking about that. But just to say, like, this isn't magic and it's going to solve everything for the person that's like always yelling in meetings, but you know, it's an approach. Okay, so what are some practical practices? Ask questions like, what are the goals you're aiming to achieve? So then, again, like you can actually propose a solution that matches the goals. Appreciate/accept that this is part of the work. Everyone has a decision maker who isn't them, right? Like I've been an executive director. I've always had a board, or I want to listen to the team, right? So no one is really operating in a vacuum, even if you think like, oh, the president of such and such, they don't have to do this work. Everyone has a decision maker who's not them. Facts are not enough. You can't just come in with the facts. Tell your story. And I heard you saying about data science storytelling earlier. Being able to tell a compelling story is another skill. And then to practice written and spoken communication. So some continued learning. So this idea of boundary spanners came from, I don't remember what EDSIN stands for, but a meeting that we were at that was bringing together communities to talk about ecological resources. So this comes in the indigenous communities. The idea of boundary spanners was where I heard about it. So some of the things that some resources articulation is a coaching. They teach people how to give talks, and then the coaching way, so a lot of like coaching facilitation practices, you can learn through like coaching classes. This is one that I really like, but those are other kinds of resources. All right, so now we're gonna move on to AI. So we're in the world of AI and we're at a data conference. We already heard a great example. So what new skills are needed in the age of AI? So everything that is new is the same, but the emphasis shifts. So we're in this new era, but we don't really need a lot of new things. It's really like shifting where it is that we think about things, putting different emphasis, revisiting some things we thought we had decided. So AI brings up a lot of challenges and opportunities. Sometimes we don't even know which one is which, and we use opportunities and carpentry. So great, amazing things about things like Copilot. It's easier to get started coding with broadening access to learning resources. But then the quality and the style of code that might become more variable within a team in an open source project. Since people can more easily create a plot, they might decide like, oh, I don't need data science expertise. I made the plot, it's fine. There are challenges around data and code governance. They consider cheating and plagiarism and like define what that even means now. Maybe our learning sources are less reliable, they're more available. And it can be a lot easier to create documentation. So this is just a short list, but there's all these different things that are both strengths and weaknesses, sometimes within the same thing. So this is, like, what do I as a leader need to think about that's different in the context of AI? So this is maybe for you personally, but also for teams. So more awareness of data and code governance, so learning more about what you need to consider. And this is where the what's old is new, is a real emphasis on quality control practices. So you've heard a lot probably in your career about test-driven development, doing testing, it's so important to do testing, but maybe you never get there because there's so much time spent on the coding. This is where we need to really dig in and be good about testing and learn more about testing. We need to reconsider support for maintainers whose load might have shifted. They might be getting in a bunch of issues and PRs, and these are often volunteers. How are we going to support them? How are we going to create frameworks for them to make decisions about what they're doing with their project? But most importantly, as a leader, is being intentional and creating the space and time to discuss and implement new practices and consistently revisit them. Take a pause. It's easy to just grab it, go, think that nothing has changed, but things are changing. And so appreciating that and sitting down with your team and talking about it and not having one engineer who uses Copilot and another that doesn't, and how are they using it in different ways, so to create that intentional space. So some continued learning, the data governance guide. I have a copy to give away. Our packages has a lot of good work testing, even though it's for our similar Python practices, but the PyOpenSci resources have some things on testing, and then the idea of style guides. So Tidyverse has a style guide. So these are great places to look where they've already started kind of mapping out some of these practices. All right, when should I or my team use AI? So here's the framework. Plan, pilot, pause, and pursue. So there are some categories. Use it, don't use it. Use it with human guidance, human in the loop. So a great Alejandra this morning gave a great talk. I think it was a perfect example of this, right? Took all the data, put it in, got it back out, knew what they were trying to achieve, then tried it out, it didn't work, refined it, and then tried it again, and then had the human in the loop as an important component of that. And so I just thought I would just love that story, because that's exactly how to use it. It's don't throw it at a wall, but really think about, what would have been the consequences, right, of getting that wrong. And so these are just some things to consider as you're making those decisions about, should I use AI? And top of the list is what is the risk involved of getting this wrong? You may, I would love this as a flow chart, maybe, but if the risk is high, you might not pass go, right? Or you want to be really building your checks. So there's just so many things to consider when you're making these decisions. So again, it kind of goes back to that pause. Think about it, plan it out. What do you expect? It's like any data science project. What do you expect? Are you getting that back? Why or why not? What might you need to change? And there's so many different considerations now. Okay, so this is the plan, pilot, pause, pursue. So plan, make a plan to understand your goals. Who will be involved and what does success look like? Always include communication in your planning with any stakeholders who will be affected. Pilot, always pilot. Pilots are so great because you get to call them pilots. And so then if something messes up, you're like, oh, sorry, it was a pilot. The first time I do anything, I call it a pilot. But it invites feedback, right? Because you're saying, I am piloting this. I want to hear how this is working for you. Pause, evaluate. Is it meeting your goals? When you did that planning, you had the goals. You maybe made metrics. How are you doing? And then decide, do you want to continue doing this? You might decide no. Or maybe you need to change it. Or how will you proceed? Or do you need another round of pilots? So this is an iterative process. You're sort of never done. But this framework, in the context of using II, again, is like, what's old is new. It's all the same kind of concepts, but you're considering different things. I think the really important part, though, in AI is always thinking about doing things with rather than to or for. So if a community is going to be impacted by something that you're doing with AI, include them in the planning. At a minimum, include them in the pilot. But the to or for framework versus the with is where you really get into trouble. Okay. Oh, that worked. Okay. So now I will take the top 2 questions and try to address those. And how much time do I have? 9 minutes. Okay, perfect. Okay, how can I facilitate collective leadership? So like a group of people being leaders, is that what we mean? Like a committee or something? Odd? Okay, I'm gonna go with that as the meaning. Great question. This can be really a challenge because you have, let's say it's a group of 5 people in your collective leadership group, and they all have different ideas, and who makes decisions isn't clear, right? That's why there's like a captain on a ship, because you know who makes the decisions. And so really in collective leadership, so first, like, the facilitation practices are really important. How do people participate? Especially if there are people you're going to continually engage with, understand how they best participate. If someone says, I really need to read a document a day in advance before we meet, make sure you create that document, give it to them a day before they meet. So try to be intentional about the ways different people will show up as their best selves in these meetings. Then, the most important part is have a process for decision making. So at the beginning of a project, who is the owner of that project? So sometimes people don't like the name owner on things, but I really like the name owner. Because so it's like in emergency training, like if you take first aid training, this doesn't really work anymore. But if people were hurt before cell phones, you wouldn't yell into a crowd, someone go call 911, because everyone would think somebody else was doing it. You would point at somebody, just a random person in the crowd, and be like, you, go call 911. See, now you're ready. Yeah, you're ready, right? So it's the same thing with these projects. Decide an owner. That person is the one that is going to, if there is an issue, make a decision, make sure actions are followed up on. Without that, your group can be stuck in the space of having conversations. So like, if you're like having trouble figuring out who's an owner, maybe you rotate it, making those decisions too, and then that's maybe more work you need to do as a group around how you can work well together. So I would say clear decision making and good practices for engaging all members of the group. Okay, how to best solicit feedback as a leader? Yep. There are a lot of ways. One of my favorite ways, this isn't a manager position, but I think you could extend it. So we would have quarterly conversations, or once every 6 months, where we would say, what's working well, what could be better? And I would ask, what could I be doing better to help you do your best work? And then that gave space for really people to answer that question. That would not work. The really important thing there, though, is the psychological safety, right? If I asked that question and people felt like whatever they told me would be used against them the next day, I'd be like, well, you told me that I talk too much, so now I'm not going to talk in any of our meetings. That probably they would not give me that feedback. So creating the safety with that person, and I would say showing that you care about them as a human. If it is like a manager relationship, this is going to sound a little weird, you as the manager are not human. You obviously are human. But it's not their job to really see you as human. you really have to do the work on yourself, that you can receive feedback that's difficult and not be like defensive about it. You have to be able to receive it. And that's a lot of work on yourself. Again, places where I've made mistakes and continue to make mistakes. The other one are anonymous surveys. But like making it a part of your process. Again, actually like project plans, plan, pilot, pause, pursue, do a retrospective. What worked well, what didn't work well. Non-blame, where you don't blameless postmortems, right? So where there's the space for things to have gone wrong and not be pointing fingers. And so in that space in a postmortem, you could have done something that negatively impacted that project. If that's just something that you regularly do as a team, then you're in a place where you'll be able to receive that feedback. Another thing is asking questions like, what do people thank you for? Or asking your friends, this is like a whole self-assessment things to ask your friends, like, what do you appreciate that I do? Helps you hear the things that you do well and not just the things that you don't do. Those are great questions. How do you know? Oh my gosh, I'm gonna like keep answering all these questions. Okay, so I'm doing my last ones. I don't know how to answer. Maybe I can answer them in Slack or something. Oh no. Okay. So my last one, how do I motivate people? You don't. That's wrong. Obviously people on the stage, like, I was thinking about this. There's the people and the speakers, and I listen to inspirational talks, and they like inspire me. But they're speaking to something about me, like, that I need as a human. And so things that people are motivated for opportunities for mastery, autonomy, purpose, and belonging. This is why people leave jobs. Okay, so that's a good, maybe an answer to a question. People would not necessarily have all of this at once. You might not get to do all of this at once. But if you have one or two, these are things that help prevent burnout, make you satisfied as a whole human. So are you able to learn something new and get better at it? Do you feel some ability to make decisions about your work? Do you understand why your work is important, either for like you personally, your mission, the goal, the organization? And then do you feel a part of something where your perspective is valued and appreciated, and others are too? So I would say maybe, so as you're saying, like, motivate someone, this is a way to align people's strengths and interests with the work that you have to do. You are super lucky to work somewhere if you get to do this, and like align it. It's like the best thing ever. So it doesn't always come together, but even if you're thinking in a volunteer context, what's important to that person? Oh, you like love painting. Okay, great, could you do our posters? You love photocopying. Awesome. So it takes some challenges. Maybe photocopying. People photocopy still? So like doing that alignment. And that takes work to kind of understand what's important to people. But so if you're saying like, should I leave a role? If you have none of these things in your work, and it doesn't seem like that will change, you're probably not going to be a very happy human. I also would say things like very toxic workplaces, like no one should yell at you at work. That's controversial. Anyway, interesting question. So, but this is kind of a guiding thing. So align work with what's important to people, and that's kind of an overall leadership thing we can do kind of wherever we are, is like look for opportunities to help people like bring out their joy and their best selves. So thank you, gracias so much for this opportunity to talk to you today about a topic that is just like really meaningful to me, that I have had a lot of questions about, and I hope that you have questions and answers too, and I'd love to continue this discussion while we're here. And thank you especially to all the people that have been graceful with me in my leadership journey, helping me learn and grow, and a lot of them are here in this room today. So thank you.